Good morning, Docpreneur Nation. My name is Michael Tatro, and you're listening to the Docpreneur Leadership Podcast this morning. And we have really a special treat to be talking about the endocannabinoid system today with Dr. Michael Stewart, Chief Medical Officer at Entourage, and Isaac Foster, the Chief Executive Officer, CEO at Entourage. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. We're going to be talking a lot about the endocannabinoid system, and thanks for being with us today.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Michael.
Yes, Michael, thank you for having us.
So everybody is pretty good at telling about themselves, and I've got your bios in front of me, but I'm going to let you gentlemen share each of your stories briefly about how you got interested in healthcare, particularly this avenue, this pathway of the endocannabinoid system. And Dr. Stewart, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you became a physician. You've been in family practice for quite a while, but what drew you in? Was this because it was a family business, or you just were super interested in helping patients?
Well, it certainly was not a family business for me. In fact, my decision to go into medicine and not into the family business created a little bit of discord in my family. Ultimately, my family were fully behind me becoming a physician. The way in which that happened actually was I took some time between college and actually entering the real workforce and decided I was going to go skiing for a year, work as a waiter in the mountains in Colorado, and wound up joining a volunteer fire department and became just kind of changed my direction. I had more of a medical focus. Then I began volunteering at our medical center. We didn't actually have a hospital in the small community in which I lived, ran with the ambulance service. And then from that standpoint, with a degree in economics, decided to go back and get my pre-medical requirements done and then go to medical school. So my entry into medicine was kind of a roundabout way. It was a course correction after I had a degree in economics and a different pathway that had been presented to me. So it was one that was an inspired change rather than a planned one. When I was in college, I wasn't going to be pre-med because I didn't want to study that hard. And so life has its own way of giving us gentle course corrections.
Well, I'm going to pivot real quick over to Isaac. Isaac, we need, interested parties who are in business, who understand business. There was a concierge physician a couple of years ago. He said, the way we get better at business and treating our patients is by knowing business. And we have to, as physicians, understand that. So I'm really excited to see that folks like yourself and Dr. Stewart and others are partnering together with the business and the healthcare side. So tell us a little bit about how you got interested in healthcare as the CEO of Entourage.
Absolutely. Back in the 90s, I did 10 years on Wall Street, primarily as an investment banker. And 4 of those years were actually concentrated in capital raises and mergers and acquisitions in biotech and pharma. And through that experience, I learned a lot about the drug development process, the different stages, the costs behind them. And that's sort of, even though I, over the next 20 years, did stints in startups, primarily as CEO, CFO, or COO, I always still had that sort of passion for drug development. And then 6 years ago, when I got involved in cannabis and really did a deep dive and became aware of the deep medicinal potential in the plant, those two things sort of came together for me. And a little bit later, Michael and I ran into each other, and we found that we were two people with almost the exact same vision. And as a startup person, I think the most valuable thing we can do for society is bring important products to market at scale. And so that's what we're doing here at Entourage.
Wow. And that dovetails well into my next question for you before we start our series of 5 bullets today. And that is for you, Dr. Stewart. How did you become interested in the endocannabinoid system? What led you down that particular specialty educational path?
Well, after medical school, I went and did a residency in family medicine. So I was board certified in family practice, although I wound up doing mostly HIV care. Ultimately owned and operated a medical office where we were the largest family practice providers of HIV care in a 5-state region. And what I noticed during that period of time when I was treating HIV, where the standard of care really wasn't yet fully available, I had many clients that were using medicinal marijuana. And at that point in time in my career, I was not writing letters of recommendation for medicinal marijuana. It was back in the 90s. There were a lot of reasons why I wasn't doing that. I also wasn't educated in it and didn't understand how marijuana worked, which was the primary reason. I had no problem with my clients using medicinal marijuana, and so I would refer them to another physician who did write those letters of recommendation. But what I noticed was my clients who were using medicinal marijuana were doing extremely well. And although I didn't do any studies on them, they appeared to be doing better than my clients that weren't using it. And what I did know is that my clients that were using marijuana in lieu of the medications that were prescription medications, like Marinol, which was a synthetic THC, most of those folks wound up leaving their prescription behind and going back to the plant. And so I was aware while I was doing HIV care that there was probably some benefit to medicinal marijuana, but this was a time when the treatment for HIV was changing dramatically. We had the introduction of the protease inhibitors, and my time was really spent studying those HIV medications, and it wasn't studying the medicinal effects of cannabis. And about 8 years ago, I had an opportunity to become an investor in a marijuana facility. And so I earnestly started studying the medicinal effects of marijuana, and I discovered the endocannabinoid system. In the endocannabinoid system, I was aware of its existence. It was discovered while I was in medical school, but it was not routinely taught in medical schools. While I was in medical school, it was not taught in mine, and it's still not routinely taught today. And the endocannabinoid system is a system in our body that's responsible for maintaining homeostasis. So it keeps balance in our body. It sort of acts as a dimmer switch for all of the other systems in our bodies. So if our immune system is overactivated, it turns it down. If it needs to be more activated, it turns it up. With pain, the endocannabinoid system is responsible for modulating pain, senses of well-being, appetite, sleep. Every single system we have in our body interacts with this endocannabinoid system. And so I really, much in the same way that when I was studying HIV, I became very inspired to learn more and more about this virus, which, by the way, is another RNA virus. So I've been working with RNA viruses for more than a quarter of a century. And this endocannabinoid system that we have, the reason why when products affect the endocannabinoid system, that they can have the ability to attenuate a wide variety of systems in our body is because this system is involved with every other system in our body, maintaining homeostasis.
Isaac, thank you for that, Dr. Stewart. Isaac, I'm going to pivot over to you, and then I'll come back to you, Dr. Stewart. But in what he was saying there, how did a common interest in this advanced endocannabinoid research and treatment that Dr. Stewart was just mentioning of chronic conditions, including infectious diseases, produce Xltran with Entourage for long COVID? And talk a little bit about what Xltran is, what long COVID is. I mean, for some of the physicians out there, I'm sure they understand, but you can give a brief background if you want.
Absolutely. I mean, let's start with long COVID, right? Because long COVID, JAMA estimates 1 out of every 2 people that become infected with COVID become long COVID patients. And that is regardless of their vaccine status or how mild their symptoms were during the infection. And so what we see is an standing population of about 27 million patients in the US today. And that number is growing at half the rate of the number of infections.
Wow. Well, tell us a little bit about what Xltran is doing for long COVID and how that dovetails into the ECS research that Dr. Stewart was talking about.
So, and for clarity, we do have 2 products. One is Xltran, and the other one is Xltran Plus. And the way that we got to this was in the beginning, and it's partially Michael's story, but I can tell it to you from the Entourage side. once in early 2020, as the pandemic was beginning, Michael was in Palm Springs, California, and the local COVID center that was setting up reached out to him and recruited him because of his RNA experience. He called us, me and the other co-founder, and said, "I'm really sorry. There's obviously a pandemic going on. I can't be involved in this company right now. I have to go back into clinical practice." And we were disappointed, but understood. And he began doing his continuing education work to go into the facility, and very quickly called us back and said, I was wrong. I can do more good for COVID in Entourage, because I've been studying all the work on COVID, and it looks like all the things that COVID stimulates, cannabis, I know, attenuates. And so the first thing he did was a deep dive into the existing research on cannabis versus SARS, and came up with a thesis that we published as a white paper in May of 2020, which was then and originally we were looking at a prophylactic, right? That was the big deal back then. Came up with the thesis, the understanding of how the ECS was connected to the immune system, how it appeared that COVID was really an erosion of the immune system, that we, through phytocannabinoids going into the ECS, were able to re-stimulate and reboot, so to speak. And that created a formulation. The formulation then led to us exploring where could we prove it out, right? As everyone familiar in drug development knows, you can preventative intervention or post. And because of all the activity in the pharmaceutical industry around the intervention and the prevention, as we were looking around, we quickly ran into the first long hauler groups, right? They were just popping up. And they were very frustrated, right? Because they had gone through and survived the infection, and they had not yet been able to return to normal life. We worked with that group for a while, and from that really informed the design of a clinical trial. And we can talk more about the clinical trial in a moment, but having been a banker financing and working in the drug development process, what we found when one starts with cannabis is that we have an opportunity to jump over phases 1 through 3, right? And phases 1 through 3 typically take about 12 years, cost $2.3 billion, and have about a 12% success rate. Using a cannabis product, we're able to go straight into a phase 4 trial, which means we're able to go straight into humans that have the indication we're looking to treat. And we get to observe it in them as our work. For me, as a banker from biotech, this was the holy grail idea, right? Because you can develop so rapidly and immediately impact large patient populations instead of waiting to go through 10 to 20 years to address something.
Well, before we dive into some deeper things related to Xltran, I want to pivot over to you, Dr. Stewart, and let's discuss the endocannabinoid system as a baseline for this discussion about what Entourage is doing with Xltran and its product there. What is the endocannabinoid system, and how is it balancing the structure and function of cell membranes? And this, you're speaking to physicians, so you can speak as clinicalese as you'd like for them, so that they have something to hold on to when they click the pause button and move on.
Sure. The endocannabinoid system, which is a natural, so it's endo because it is in our own bodies, cannabinoid because it actually responds to phytocannabinoids, and we discovered the phytocannabinoids before we discovered the endocannabinoid system. So it's a system of ligands, or these chemicals that our body produces, and receptors, which interact with those chemical messengers, and the enzymes that break down those chemical messengers. So it's a system in our body where our body communicates information. It's a feedback system. It winds up being a system where a nerve cell stimulates another nerve, and the nerve that is stimulated then will release an endocannabinoid to send a signal back to the nerve that is talking to it. And generally that signal is a damper. It's to slow things down, although it can be excitatory as well. So the endocannabinoid system is monitoring all of the systems in our body and is responsible for keeping them in balance. So the endocannabinoid system is what interacts with the stresses in our life. Any type of stress that occurs will create a reaction in our body. And then the endocannabinoid system is sort of responsible for bringing our bodies back to its natural state of being. So if you can consider maybe a deer that's grazing in a meadow and it's having a very nice, happy day, and suddenly a predator comes about, and that deer needs to go into flight or fight mode to run away from a cougar. And so that deer will activate its sympathetic nervous system and it will run away. And if it is successful, it finds another field and it has escaped and it's going to go back to grazing. And that deer is going to be very excited when it runs away and gets away from its predator. But in a few minutes of standing in that field, it will return to its natural state of being, which is going to be grazing. And the endocannabinoid system is the system that helps that animal return to its natural state of being. So it will act as a damper and help us if we are in these chronic stress states. It will help it bring us back into our natural state of being, which should be one of wellness. Now, our endocannabinoid system gets stressed as well. So if we are under stress 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we can knock our endocannabinoid system out of balance. But of course, our bodies are pretty miraculous. They have ways of rebalancing our endocannabinoid system. And so when we give it the proper nutrients, and by proper nutrients, omega-6 and 3 fatty acids are essential for proper operation of the endocannabinoid system. Any toxicities in our bodies can also interfere with that. So the endocannabinoid system will be brought back into balance through proper nutrition, voluntary exercise, yoga, meditation, many of those things that we achieve when we're kind of in our flow. And for people that are familiar with heart-brain coherence, that's a state that will help balance the endocannabinoid system. So there are many ways we naturally balance the endocannabinoid system. And then we also have natural ways through the phytocannabinoids that we can balance the endocannabinoid system. For someone who is cannabis naive and they come in contact with a phytocannabinoid, their body's endocannabinoid system will upregulate their naturally occurring endocannabinoid receptors, which makes the endocannabinoid system more effective. So microdosing on small amounts of phytocannabinoids can keep our endocannabinoid system in balance. Excuse me. I might have to take just a second break.
Yeah, go ahead. Let me pivot over to Isaac. Isaac, I want to wrap the step that the thing that the other handles that physicians can hold on to that related to what Dr. Stewart is saying about the research component of this. What is Entourage's charter, mission, and vision related to? I think in my notes here, I love this. The future of pharma, bringing the future of pharma forward by giving doctors multiple safe and accessible treatment options beyond patent-driven single molecule barriers of today.
Working as a banker to pharma and understanding the model, right? It's really about building an unassailable proprietary position. And there's a cost for it, as we mentioned, $2.3 billion. And that money's raised, right, from the markets, and it demands a return. And that return has to come from somewhere, and it comes from the patients. In learning and studying and understanding cannabis, and again, being able to start at phase 4 rather than phase 1 means that we can bring highly effective therapeutics to market, to clinical practice in under a year for less than $500,000 in research costs. And so our mission is to take the promise of medicinal cannabis and deliver it into the hands of clinicians, because they are definitely not likely to recommend that people go to their local dispensary and buy, an ounce of Blue Dream and smoke it every day. The plant is not a one-size-fits-all solution. That's the other great myth. It is a plant with hundreds of active ingredients, and unlike typical pharma, the solution is not isolating all these individual ingredients and then trying to put them back together to create a patent, to file an IND, to go, again, take 10 to 20 years to bring a product to market. When you're studied in the art of working with the plant medicinally, one understands that you want to stay as close to the origin material as possible, and then understand the plant has thousands of varieties. In fact, anywhere you plant it is a new variety because there are two very strong components in how this plant expresses the chemistry. One is the starting genetics. The other is the environment in which it is grown. Those two together equal the phenotype, and phenotypes are unique, and they are unique in their chemistry. That's why you can't just walk in and buy any single cannabis product to treat any single indication. And so Entourage's mission is, first, we're dealing with hemp. So federally legal, because the active ingredients can all be harvested from plants that are legally classified as hemp. So that's our first step, making it easy for clinicians, for doctors to have public access to the products without having to work through a dispensary system or a pharmacy counter. So,
no, go ahead. You're going to finish.
And so to have that kind of access to cannabis in formulations that are specific for indications that have been designed to treat that indication, and then are supported with human clinical data so that physicians can understand why they're using it and how to use it and what to expect in their patients. The last step, because we don't have to amortize billions of dollars into the sale price, is that we're actually able to bring these highly effective products with clinical evidence to the patient, the end user, typically for under $100 per month. Because our goal has always been, looking at the broader healthcare system, that our product price needs to be within a patient's copay.
Well, I love that, and I also love the evidence side of that. And we'll pivot over to Dr. Stewart here. I have kind of a two-part question for you. The first part is, as a physician, putting your physician family practice hat on, you're obviously in this space, but look, if you were to step out of this space for a moment and think, you're conversing with other colleagues and physicians, internists, family medicine doctors, some specialists. Are they excited about this, or is there still more research that needs to be done on ECS? And what advice do you have for them? And that's just a real short question before we move into the next question I have for you.
The research that needs to be done on the endocannabinoid system is vast. We have just dipped our toe in the water of the endocannabinoid system. And as we focus on balancing the endocannabinoid system, my guess is fairly soon there'll be a specialty called endocannabinology, where people really focus on how we can keep our endocannabinoid systems operating in an ideal situation. Really, the endocannabinoid system, when the endocannabinoid system is balanced, any other therapy is going to be more effective. And because the endocannabinoid system touches every single organ system, in essence, we are going to be able to improve any type of medical therapy by making sure our endocannabinoid systems are balanced. And that's going to bring us back again to nutrition and all the things we should be doing that we don't do that well. Watch our nutrition, voluntary exercise, do things that you enjoy, meditate, stretch, all of those natural things. But the endocannabinoid system research is in its infancy.
Wow. Thank you for that. And I think that that's helpful for physicians to put a grip around this, because we see it talked about at conferences, and we see it talked about in some literature out there. And there are some physicians leading the charge in this space. But that moves into our third question for you, and that is for Dr. Stewart, and then I'll pivot over to you to add to that, Isaac, and put some substance around this question. But Dr. Stewart, you published a white paper in 2020 on long COVID and the endocannabinoid system. Briefly give us some examples of how the ECS addresses pain and inflammation for physicians listening.
The endocannabinoid system, when I was doing my continuing medical education to explore how COVID-19 was affecting patients and the therapeutic approaches, I continued to vet the sources and kind of went down a rabbit hole and discovered that really what we were talking about when people were symptomatic with COVID-19, this cytokine storm we heard so much about, was that every single inflammatory marker that we were following medically with these patients infected with COVID-19 could be attenuated by either cannabis or part of the cannabis plant. And so I started studying these different inflammatory markers and the immune system's response. And every single path, remember, I'd been studying the endocannabinoid system, so that was, forefront in my experience. That was the area I was studying when I was asked to do my research or asked to go and treat COVID. And it was in the research portion of it that it just became very, very clear to me that the endocannabinoid system was going to be intimately involved in this. And we get into the cytokines that are activated. We have TNF alpha, the interleukins, all of these different cytokines. Every single time that I went down and researched those cytokines and how they were being released and what could help, what information we had, the cannabis plant was always in there in some way, shape, or form. And it wasn't always the full cannabis plant. It might be parts of the cannabis plant that were in there. As you know, over the last 100 years, while this plant has been illegal to use and difficult to study, a lot of the research has been taking this plant apart, isolating different components, trying to concentrate them and to figure out what their medicinal qualities were. And so it became very clear to me, with the different components of the cannabis plant all having different effects on the cytokines and other inflammatory markers we're following in COVID-19, that it would make sense for us to use the whole cannabis plant. And, the beauty in that is because cannabis has been used 10,000 years medicinally, it has such a stellar safety record, even though that might be debated a little bit in the media. The information we were able to give to the institutional review board for approval on our phase 4 clinical trial on the safety of our cannabis-based product was sufficient for them to approve our trial.
Sure. So where can we find a copy of this, Isaac or Dr. Stewart? Isaac, what did you find interesting in the white paper? And then I'll pivot back over to you, Dr. Stewart, about where they can find this. Maybe we can put it in the show notes, or they can request a copy of it from your team. Isaac, I'll let you start.
So I'll be honest. When Michael made that phone call to call us back, I said, "This is too convenient to be true." Right. So I was the internal skeptic. I mean, I trusted Michael and I believed him, but as a business person, right, the probability that a pandemic hits the world and you happen to be working on something that might be able to be applicable to it, I just couldn't get my head wrapped around that. But I understood Michael's paper. I had, in fact, spent a lot of time. My exposure to the ECS was quite different. I started in cannabis when I did 6 years ago commercially, and I'm a co-founder and chairman of what is now, I believe, the largest physical wholesale marketplace for cannabis in the world. It's, if you can imagine, it's a Costco-sized facility that has nothing but wholesale marijuana in Oregon. And Oregon, in fact, is the largest producer, per capita of cannabis in the country, and has a unique environment in Southern Oregon, which allows them to produce premium cannabis at an incredibly inexpensive price. But through that, being in that world, meeting all the people, mostly people that had been originally from the black markets, were all heavy users, they were the ones who really told me from an experiential perspective how important various components of the plant are, and specifically their focus primarily on terpenes rather than CBD or THC in their selections of the products that they themselves consumed. That was my exposure. That was like, there's something going on here. And then Michael, when I shared my experience, explained to me medically what I was observing. And so I was able to correlate that anecdotal experience at scale to Michael's understanding, and I believed him. And we went forward, and we did, I said, "You're right. We've got something here. Let's go do it."
And Dr. Stewart, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about how they can find or access the white paper as well.
I believe actually, I might need to punt that one back to Isaac. I believe it's still available on the internet on mj.com.
Okay.
It is.
And it is also available just by sending an inquiry to info@entourage.com, and we can send that paper out.
The real answer is Chris at entourage.com.
Okay, that's even better.
Yes.
Well, I will make sure we put that in the show notes for those folks listening in their vehicles or on a run. Maybe they're on the treadmill and you're like, I'm going to read and dig into that white paper.
Xltran.com. That's the letter X, the letter L, the letter T, the letter R as in Robert, A as in Apple, N as in Nancy.com. There's a registration process because we have to protect clinician information from the public. The registration is very simple. Chris will handle it. And once clinicians have access to all of our information on COVID and long COVID.
We have a lot more information available than just a white paper on our product or on cannabis and COVID.
And that is exciting. And that actually leads into my, a sub question before we hit our fourth point today. And Dr. Stewart, putting your physician hat on for those physicians listening, they've heard a little bit about this. It's bite-sized nuggets in literature. They might be thinking to themselves, I'm just not sure if my patients are comfortable with this, if they're ready for this. How do I, as a physician, help them become more comfortable with what's happening in this space? That's a pretty open-ended question, but I think that I'll let you answer that because they're the clinician in the space here.
Are you talking about their comfort level with cannabinoids or their comfort level with the anxiety and the fear around this pandemic situation?
I think it's probably going to be both. Yeah.
Okay.
So answer that from both perspectives.
Well, I understand that, cannabis has a lot of stigma. Medicinally, I would invite them to explore the endocannabinoid system. And once they do, I think they'll be hooked. If not, that's fine. We are doing the clinical trials needed to be able to give evidence-based medicine to support our cannabinoid-based product. But the beautiful thing about this, as Isaac mentioned, cannabinoids are only a small part of the chemical composition of the cannabis plant. And in our study, and we can talk about this more if we need to, but we have also developed a cannabinoid-free. So Xltran does not have any phytocannabinoids in it. It has terpenes, it has essential omega fatty acids, it has amino acids, and it has medicinal terpenes in it. But the Xltran does not have any cannabinoids. The Xltran Plus does. And the beautiful thing about the cannabis plant, it is so incredibly medicinal that when we take a few components away from the cannabis plant, it might not be quite as medicinal as it was as a complete plant. However, it's still very medicinal. And the information that we'll be releasing from our clinical trial, the data is still being evaluated in the moment. This is the last week of our data collection. So we're jumping the gun just a little bit to be able to release data. But the information, I believe, is going to show that we now have a cannabinoid-free Xltran and a cannabinoid Xltran Plus that are both effective in attenuating the symptoms of post-acute COVID syndrome. Xltran Plus is more effective than Xltran, but Xltran is effective, and it's more effective than anything else that we have available right now. And so the beautiful thing about this is for those people who need to be drug tested, police officers, pilots, people who are working, in the military, they can't even use CBD. So the cannabinoid-free preparation that we have makes this product available for everyone. And even though it might not work quite as well as Xltran Plus does, it works better than anything else on the market. And for those people who can use cannabinoids, we have Xltran Plus. Now, the beautiful thing, if you want to talk about how this also has an ability to help with the concerns that are going around this pandemic and the anxiety and the fear and just having our stress levels elevated, we are offering phytocannabinoids, and even Xltran without the phytocannabinoids has a terpene that helps balance that endocannabinoid system. So what we're doing is providing support to the endocannabinoid system, which is getting knocked out of balance because of the stress that we're living in around COVID-19, and then also the stress that these COVID long haulers are having. These folks are really sick, and folks don't know what to do to help them. So there's the anxiety of having something that you don't know how long it's going to last. You don't know when it's going to go away, if ever. The example I like to use is if you're walking around in bare feet and you stub your toe and you have that pain, you're going to have a very different experience with that pain than if that pain was not around your stubbing your toe. So you stub your toe, you know that pain is there because you stubbed your toe, and that pain is going to resolve soon. And so you have hope that the pain is going to resolve. So that pain is a different experience than if that pain occurred out of nowhere. You have no idea how long it's going to last or what you're going to be able to do to resolve it. And so the phytocannabinoids and even Xltran with the terpenes in there are going to help balance that endocannabinoid system in these times of increased stress. Anytime we have a balanced endocannabinoid system, whatever other therapies are being implemented are going to be more effective.
Thank you for that, Dr. Stewart. Our next question, I'll pivot over to you, Isaac, very quickly, and that is some handles to hold on to that if I'm listening correctly here, is we've got clinical trials that the data collection will be out soon, that the physicians will be able to grab onto that. There's already literature, there's white papers, there's a wealth of information that the physicians can hold on to. And what other handles would you encourage them for physicians listening and wanting to learn more and to study? Because I think it was one of our previous guests had said, show me the evidence. And I love that about concierge physicians in particular, because they are so into personalizing and researching, and even in some cases beta testing themselves on different products that they're learning about that are in the forefront of innovation. Are you excited about what's happening in this space, and what does the future look like for you? Or I'm sorry, for Entourage and the ECS space, and maybe even Xltran. And that's enough of a question right there, but I'll let you jump in on that.
Yeah, that's like 5 questions. I don't want to answer all of them. But I'm going to go quickly, and I'm going to share something with you. We have no commercial relationship with this, but I think if you're serious as a physician about wanting to look at cannabis medicinally, the first thing you must understand is its actual history in the world, in this country, in medicine. And I highly recommend, it's hard to find, but there was a book written by Jack Herer, who most people have heard his name before and know that he was an activist, but most people have never actually read his work. His work is comprehensive, it's detailed, there's references. Everything that he says in this book is researchable, due diligenceable, and provable. And it is the real history of cannabis, which was the most widely traded global commodity until about 100 years ago. It is literally woven into the settling of America. And its medicinal use, as Michael has said, is documented in this country, because prior to Prohibition, almost every single medicine cabinet had hemp syrup in it. Hemp syrup was just the name. It was very similar to products that we have today. And you may also be familiar if you're with old pharmaceutical practices, they used to vaporize a lot of things. Cannabis extracts for medical use were amongst the things that they used to vaporize back then because it was highly effective. Think about this, right? When you landed in New York with your family, your spouse and your children, and you're basically taking a Cadillac Escalade, right, that has 2 horses pulling it, and you are loading it up with everything you have to go to a place that you don't even know exists, and there is nobody there. There's no CVS, there's no Walgreens, there's no Walmart, there's no gas station. What's your plan? And the plan was hemp, and it's documented. It's there in our history. So I highly recommend the book. Again, it's by Jack Herer. It is The Emperor Wears No Clothes. It is not widely available, and when you find it, it may be, you know, $50, but it will, if you read it, and if you doubt anything, you can go look at the references, but it will change your perspective on this plant. So that's the first thing. And the second thing for us is we believe we are at the dawning of the reintegration of plant medicine into clinical practice, and that ultimately will have a very significant impact on the overall cost of healthcare.
That's
for
encouraging.
all involved.
That's great. That's what we're all looking for in the future. Dr. Stewart, a question. We have 3 final questions as we come in for a landing today. And the last question is a surprise one I ask of all of our guests, and I'll ask it of you as well, Isaac. But our third to last question is, Dr. Stewart, what causes the endocannabinoid system to fail, and how can it be restored? I'll let you quickly answer that.
Well, the endocannabinoid system, like our other systems, is affected by stresses in our body. And when we're overusing the endocannabinoid system and relying on it without providing it additional support, and without doing those things that we can do naturally to provide support to the endocannabinoid system, it gets knocked out of balance. And so the things that we can do to rebalance the phytocannabinoid system is to pay attention to nutrition, especially the microbiome as well, voluntary exercise, meditation, even listening to music. Anytime that we are getting into this heart-brain coherence, we are supporting our endocannabinoid system. And then I believe in times where we are just overall under a whole lot of stress, whether it's good stress or bad stress. Stress is knocking this system out of balance, and we co-evolved, over the last 10,000 years, we have cultivated the cannabis plant, and it, as well as other plants, although cannabis is my focus, have the ability to support our bodies. And so in many ways, cannabis acts like a nutrient in our bodies as well as a medicine. And I think during these times of elevated stress, using the phytocannabinoids and in a non-euphoric and non-intoxicating way, these do not have to create euphoria or intoxication, and our products do not. So using these in a non-euphoric, non-intoxicating way is the way that I would and do reach to help balance my endocannabinoid system.
Great. Thank you for that. Isaac, I'm going to move on to the next question, and then I'll pivot over for the same question for you, Dr. Stewart. But Isaac, first, how do you anticipate long COVID patients and physicians, I'm going to add, will respond to Xltran based on the research so far?
So we've been in contact with a large number of long COVID practitioners since we started the trial, because we recruited most of our patients from existing clinics. We think this has right now, long COVID is a high touch, long patient care process, right? Patients are in these clinics for months and months and months. We believe with Xltran and Xltran Plus, for the clinics that add them to their protocol, they'll be able to completely change the business model for their long COVID practice, meaning that it will go from trying to treat multiple diverse symptoms with individualized protocols, which is what's currently being practiced, to giving people support using Xltran as the primary therapeutic. What we've seen, and again, we'll have more data so people can read this for themselves, is a very high incidence amongst people that use the product of returning to quote unquote their prior infection life. And that's a very different type of practice. It should be a high volume, high throughput, where instead of helping 1,600 or 2,000 patients or 5,000 patients over the course of 6 months, you'll be able to help thousands of patients per month. Because we think long COVID is very easy to get ahead of. And that's part of why we've focused on making our solution so inexpensive, so that the barrier to access is very low and the efficacy is very high.
Great. Same question over to you, Dr. Stewart. How do you anticipate long COVID patients and physicians, I'll add, will respond to Xltran based on the research you've looked at from a clinician perspective as well?
Well, the beautiful thing about Xltran and Xltran Plus is that they are tools in the toolbox. And if we've learned anything from RNA viruses in the past, treatment of this is not a single modality. And we want to use, we want to take the entourage effect into consideration, not only with the cannabis plant, but with the other therapeutics that are being used. And what I maintain is that when our system that is responsible for maintaining balance in our body is in balance, the rest of our systems are going to fall back in line much, much more quickly with the other therapies that are directed towards those individual organ systems. So if we are, going after a symptom that has to do with the heart and the cardiovascular system is already in balance, it's going to be easier to treat that symptom. So we are a tool in the toolbox. We're not something that you take and expect it to be a magic bullet. This is about bringing your body back into balance after a stressful event. And it's about supporting. And I think that especially now that we have a cannabinoid-free preparation, the experience that I have is the clinicians are really excited about the cannabinoid-free one, and it has opened doors for us to be able to do some more research. And in fact, we're looking for centers that have several patients so that we can do some case studies in these centers and actually continue to collect data in a compliant and effective way while we are getting clinicians used to using this product in their own practices. And if clinicians have 3 to 5 patients they want to do case studies on, we have a principal investigator who can do the heavy lifting on those case studies. And so for a doc who wants to publish and they want to do a case study with long COVID and our product, we have the support for them to be able to do that. And that support is so close to being available that folks should reach out to us now. By the time this airs, we should have a system in place to help people do case studies, to bring them to a place where they can publish. We take care of the cost of the product and give them support so they know what information to collect, and we can help with the writing of the paper and all of those things. We really want to collect good, compliant information about this so that we can roll this out with good evidence-based medicine. We do have a placebo-controlled trial. That's great, but we also get great information from case studies. Not all of the information that we need to have out there to evaluate the safety and efficacy of a product needs to come from a double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. We can do lots of trials with doctors who do case studies. Writing this information up is really important, especially at the beginning stages, which we are with COVID. We are still learning about this. This is really very new. And our ability to get information out there to other clinicians, I'm really excited about that. And I encourage people that are drawn to case studies to reach out to us as well.
Absolutely. And we will put the contact information for your team there in the show notes below and above. So please, if you are a physician, this does sound of interest to you, give this team a call and learn more. So our final question, I'll pivot over to you first, Isaac, and then Dr. Stewart, I'll let you close. But we ask this of all of our guests, and that is, if you were to think of, and the answer is always, which one do I choose? Which story do I choose? And that is more of a testimonial of how you've seen what your vision, what your charter is, how you've seen it come to fruition, that you're like, you know what, if I hung up my spurs today and I handed over the keys to the next leader in line or the next physician in line, I could go home a happy person because we did what we set out to do. What's one of those many stories that comes to mind that you're just like, this is what energizes me, and this is what gets me up in the morning, and this is why we started this? Isaac, I'll start with you, then Dr. Stewart.
Well, I have to tell you, we're in that moment. So I couldn't hang up my spurs yet, but as we said, there's 27 million patients. We know from working with long COVID centers that have tried everything in the pipeline, everything over the counter, every idea, and have not been able to move the needle on long COVID, right? In watching long COVID and seeing the impact in the lives of the people that get it, the doctors, the lawyers, the professionals that lose their lives because they are no longer able to perform at the level that they did before they got COVID. The impacts, the foreclosures, the businesses, it's devastating. It's devastating. And they feel trapped because they have to watch it and can't do anything. Those people right now today, those are the people that drive me. And if we can get this done, I don't plan to put up my spurs, but then I can say everything I've done up until this moment was worth it.
Wow. I love that. I love that answer. That's a good one. Dr. Stewart, I'll let you close us out. Same question.
Well, I think for me, what is so amazing about this path that I'm on right now is how when I stand where I am and I look back, I see about how it explains why I did what I did, when I did it, when I didn't know what I was doing. I was drawn into medicine when I had a career path that was not about medicine. I wound up being drawn into HIV care as a family practitioner. I've been working with RNA viruses for 25 years. I worked in the HIV field when there was no standard of care. We didn't know what to do. I became an expert in bringing novel therapies into clinical practice. And I was dealing with medications that had very, very high levels of toxicity. Now I find myself, I'm dealing with another RNA virus. It's another area where we don't have a standard of care. We're now working with a plant that has a safety profile that is absolutely phenomenal. And I have the ability to help bring novel therapies into clinical practice in a way I didn't do before. We've, for example, I reached out for a clinical trials director and was able to rekindle somebody that I knew 20 years ago and came back together, and we were able to put together this clinical trial. And then in the interim analysis, we had some problems with the clinical trial, which appeared like we may have made a 7-figure mistake. And as it turns out, it wound up giving us a cannabinoid-free preparation. So these things where something happens and you think it's a bad thing in the beginning, and then it turns out to be a really good thing for you. The synergies and the way that this seems to have drawn together my previous educational experiences and work experiences. I too, like Isaac, don't feel like I'm ready to hang up my spurs, because I'm right at the place where I can sort of see, this is why I had all the training to get to where I am. And let's get this rolled out. And maybe we can steward and foster plant medicines back into medicine.
Wow. That would be an achievement. And we're so thankful for what your team, what you are all doing there at Entourage. You are truly moving the needle forward with the phase 4 long COVID clinical trials. There's continuing to provide more answers for physicians and even patients and your team. And they'll continue now to inform the future of long COVID products and formulations into the future. And if you're a physician listening, whether you're a concierge doctor or just a specialty physician listening, or a physician in business, or an academic or a writer, I encourage you to contact Dr. Stewart and Isaac. I'll put the information, their emails, and so on, to the white papers, to the educational research, to the literature, to the books, to their emails in the show notes below. Your team is truly doing something that, as we say around here quite a bit, it's no longer about being the best doctor in the world anymore. It's about being the best doctor for the world, for your patients, and for your local community. And that's what I love about what you guys are doing over there at Entourage. Thank you for being our guest today. Can't wait to dive into part 2 next time. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Michael. Have a great day.
Thank you, Michael.